Retirement was supposed to be peaceful, but my nights were anything but. The echoes of my past haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. When I closed my eyes, I was back in the labyrinthine corridors of the Paris catacombs, the smell of decay thick in the air. It was a mission from years ago, one that had etched itself into my mind and refused to fade. My name is Agent Grimshaw, or at least it was when I served in the Interpol Incident Response Team 6, known as Deep 6. They called me Grimshaw, but I always felt more like a ghost. The call came in the dead of night, dragging me from a restless sleep. The voice on the other end was cold and precise, a reminder that I could never truly escape my past. They needed me for one last mission, a task involving angelic activity that only someone with my experience could handle. The threat of Deep 6 finding and silencing me if I refused was enough to make my blood run cold. I had no choice but to comply. I contacted Agent Celine, a new recruit I had mentored during my last days with the team. Celine was everything I once aspired to be: professional, idealistic, and driven by a sense of justice. She wore round-rimmed glasses and a dark three-piece suit that seemed to defy the chaotic world we operated in. Despite her polished exterior, I knew she was unprepared for the horrors that awaited us. Our journey began with a flight to Paris, the city of lights now shrouded in the darkness of our mission. The Paris catacombs were a labyrinth of death and history, a place where the past clung to the present like a shroud. As we descended into the depths, the air grew colder, and the silence more oppressive. I could see the fear in Celine's eyes, but she held her ground, determined to prove herself. Navigating the catacombs was no easy feat. The passages twisted and turned, each corner revealing more macabre displays of bones and skulls. It was easy to get lost in the darkness, both literally and metaphorically. We pressed on, guided by the cryptic instructions I had received. Our destination was the chamber of the Saint of Parasites, an ancient goddess who had made the catacombs her home. The Saint of Parasites was a grotesque and immense being, a deity of decay and despair. Her chamber was filled with foul imagery and creatures that defied description. As we entered, the stench of rot assaulted our senses, and I saw Celine's resolve waver for the first time. The saint was not one to be approached lightly, but we had no choice. We needed her information to locate the angels hiding in Berlin. From the shadows emerged the Rat Woman, a tall, thin figure with long black hair and 4 arms painted in red. She was the saint's emissary, a harbinger of the dark truths we sought. The ritual to gain the saint's favor was as disturbing as I had feared. It involved a sacrificial pig, its blood serving as an offering to the ancient goddess. Celine watched in horror, her idealism shattering with each drop of blood spilled. The Saint of Parasites spoke in riddles and omens, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the chamber. She revealed the existence of a forgotten country, erased from history as part of a deal with a powerful entity. This eerie sense of loss and cover-up added a new layer of complexity to our mission. The angels in Berlin were tied to this forgotten land, and we had to uncover their secrets to stop them. Armed with the saint's knowledge, we prepared to leave the catacombs. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, and I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. As we emerged into the Paris night, I saw the city through different eyes. The lights seemed dimmer, the streets quieter, as if the city itself knew of the darkness we were about to confront. On our way to Berlin, I couldn't help but reflect on the internal conflicts that plagued me. The guilt of my past actions, the moral implications of my work with Deep 6, and the fear of what awaited us. Celine, too, was beginning to understand the gruesome realities of our mission. Her idealism was fading, replaced by a grim determination to see this through. As the plane descended into Berlin, I knew that our journey was far from over. The Club Anat awaited us, a place where angels hid among the unsuspecting. The horrors of the Paris catacombs were only the beginning. The real nightmare was yet to come. Descending deeper into the Paris catacombs felt like stepping into another world, one where the line between the living and the dead blurred. The passages grew narrower and more treacherous, the air thicker with the scent of earth and decay. Every turn brought us closer to the heart of darkness, where the saint of parasites held court. The flickering light from our torches cast eerie shadows on the walls, revealing the grotesque displays of bones that lined our path. Celine walked beside me, her resolve seemingly intact, but I could sense her growing unease. The saint's chamber was like nothing I had ever seen. It was a vast, subterranean expanse filled with grotesque statues and bizarre creatures that seemed to move in the periphery of our vision. The air was heavy with the smell of rot, and the walls were slick with some unknown substance. In the center of the chamber, the saint of parasites herself awaited. She was an immense and terrifying figure, her form a grotesque amalgamation of decaying flesh and ancient power. Her presence was overwhelming, and I felt a chill run down my spine as we approached. The rat woman emerged from the shadows, her tall, thin frame moving with an unsettling grace. Her long black hair hung like a shroud, and her red-painted body glistened in the dim light. With her 4 arms, she gestured for us to come closer. Celine hesitated, but I took the lead, knowing that any display of fear could be fatal. The rat woman spoke in a voice that was both soft and menacing, explaining the ritual we needed to perform to gain the saint's favor. It involved a sacrificial pig, a grim task that left Celine visibly shaken. Performing the ritual was a gruesome affair. The pig's squeals echoed through the chamber as we carried out the sacrifice, its blood pooling at our feet. The rat woman chanted in a language I couldn't understand, her words resonating with an otherworldly power. As the ritual reached its climax, the saint of parasites began to stir. Her eyes opened, revealing a depth of knowledge and malice that was almost unbearable. She spoke to us in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, revealing the information we sought. The saint's words were cryptic, filled with riddles and omens. She spoke of a forgotten country, one that had been erased from history as part of a dark pact. This place, lost to time, held the key to understanding the angelic activity we were investigating. The sense of loss and cover-up was palpable, adding a new layer of complexity to our mission. The angels hiding in Berlin were somehow connected to this forgotten land, and we needed to uncover their secrets to stop them. As we prepared to leave, the rat woman gave us one final warning. The angels were not what they seemed, and their true nature was far more horrifying than we could imagine. This revelation hung heavy over us as we retraced our steps through the catacombs. The path seemed longer and more treacherous on the way back, each step echoing the weight of the knowledge we had gained. Back on the surface, the Paris night felt strangely oppressive. The city, usually so full of life, seemed subdued, as if it too was aware of the darkness beneath its streets. Celine and I found a quiet cafe to regroup, the contrast between its warm, inviting atmosphere and the cold horrors of the catacombs almost too much to bear. Over steaming cups of coffee, we discussed our next steps. Celine was shaken but resolute, her idealism giving way to a steely determination. Our flight to Berlin was somber, the weight of our mission pressing down on us. I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that had settled over me. The information we had gained from the Saint of Parasites was invaluable, but it also painted a grim picture of what lay ahead. The Club Anat awaited us, a place where angels hid among the unsuspecting. The horrors of the Paris catacombs were only the beginning. As we landed in Berlin, the city's cold, crisp air did little to alleviate the tension. We knew our time was limited, and every moment brought us closer to the inevitable confrontation with the angels. Celine and I moved through the city with purpose, our destination clear. The Club Anat was a nondescript building in a bustling part of town, but its ordinary exterior belied the supernatural threats within. Entering the club, we were immediately struck by the atmosphere. It was unusually quiet for New Year's night, the usual revelry replaced by an eerie stillness. Religious symbols adorned the walls, and the air was thick with a sense of anticipation. We were on edge, knowing that at any moment the angels could reveal themselves. The stage was set for the next chapter of our mission, and the true nightmare was just beginning. The Club Onat stood at the corner of a bustling Berlin street, its exterior unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the urban landscape. But as Celine and I approached, a sense of foreboding settled over us. It was New Year's night, and yet the usual throng of revelers was absent. The club's entrance was guarded by a silence that felt almost tangible, thickening the air with an unsettling stillness. We exchanged a glance, the weight of our mission pressing down on us as we stepped inside. The interior of Onat was a stark contrast to its ordinary exterior. The walls were adorned with religious symbols, crosses, icons, and inscriptions in languages both ancient and modern. The club was dimly lit, the few patrons present casting long shadows in the muted light. The music, if it could be called that, was a low, droning hum that seemed to reverberate through our very bones. We moved through the space, every sense on high alert, aware that danger could lurk in every corner. Our first contact within the club was Mara, the bartender. She was a striking figure, with a punkish appearance that belied her inner turmoil. Her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail as we approached the bar. I introduced ourselves and explained, in veiled terms, the nature of our investigation. Mara's demeanor shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition and fear crossing her features. She was more than she seemed, and I knew she held crucial information. Mara led us to a secluded corner of the club, away from prying eyes. She spoke in hushed tones, revealing her involvement in a virtual support group for chronic depression. This connection had brought her into contact with Mr. Heinrich, the club's manager, and the shrine he had constructed in his office. Mara's insights were invaluable, painting a picture of a man under the influence of angelic forces, his actions driven by a power he barely understood. As we moved deeper into the club, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The sense of anticipation was palpable, as if the very walls were holding their breath. We found Mr. Heinrich in his office, a small room cluttered with religious paraphernalia. The shrine dominated the space, a grotesque assemblage of icons and artifacts that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Heinrich himself was a gaunt figure, his eyes hollow and haunted. Our confrontation with Heinrich was brief and violent. The angels did not reveal themselves immediately, but their presence was unmistakable. Heinrich's transformation began slowly, his features twisting and contorting as the supernatural forces took hold. It was a horrifying spectacle, one that Celine and I were barely prepared for. The room seemed to close in around us, the air thickening with a malevolent force. The first angel emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and changing in ways that defied logic. It was both beautiful and terrible, a creature of divine power twisted into something monstrous. Celine and I fought with every ounce of strength we had, using the sacrificial lamb's blood as a weapon against these beings. The struggle was intense, each moment a battle for survival against forces far beyond our understanding. Mara's involvement deepened as she helped us navigate the chaos. Her knowledge of the club and its hidden spaces proved invaluable, allowing us to outmaneuver the angels and gain the upper hand. But the cost was high. The supernatural entities were relentless, their attacks growing more frenzied with each passing second. The club became a battlefield, its once familiar spaces transformed into a nightmarish landscape. The tide began to turn in our favor, but the threat was far from over. The angels' true nature was revealed in their final desperate transformations. They were not just creatures of divine power, but manifestations of something far darker and more insidious. The realization struck me with a chilling clarity. We were dealing with forces that transcended human understanding, their motives and desires shrouded in mystery. As the battle reached its peak, I felt a surge of resolve. This was what I had been trained for, the reason I had been recruited into Deep Six, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on me. The moral ambiguity of our actions, the manipulation of Mara, and the horrors we had witnessed all took their toll. Celine and I were left standing in the aftermath, bloodied but unbroken, the echoes of our fight reverberating through the silent club. We regrouped, the gravity of our situation sinking in. The angels were defeated, but the cost was high. The Club Anat was in ruins, its patrons and staff left to grapple with the aftermath of a supernatural conflict they could barely comprehend. Mara, shaken but resolute, became an unlikely ally, her connection to Heinrich and the angels giving us crucial insights into the forces we faced. As we left the club, the Berlin night seemed colder, the silence deeper. We had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The horrors of the Paris catacombs and the angels of Berlin were just the beginning. The true nightmare lay ahead, in the shadows of our past and the depths of our souls. The battle inside the Club Anat had left us bruised and shaken, but there was no time to dwell on the aftermath. The angels, though momentarily defeated, had only revealed a fraction of their true power. Their grotesque transformations hinted at a deeper, more sinister force at play. As Celine and I regrouped, the realization struck us both. The real fight was just beginning. The angels' true forms were terrifying to behold. As they revealed themselves fully, their bodies twisted and contorted in ways that defied human comprehension. Their eyes glowed with an unholy light, and their voices echoed with a resonance that chilled us to the bone. These beings were not merely divine. They were manifestations of something far darker and more malevolent. Their presence was an affront to the natural order, a blasphemy that demanded retribution. Celine and I fought with every ounce of strength we had left. Our weapons felt inadequate against the supernatural onslaught, but the sacrificial lamb's blood proved to be our saving grace. Its purity countered the angels' corruption, creating a barrier between us and their malevolent influence. The struggle was brutal and unrelenting, each moment a battle for our very souls. The angels' attacks grew more frenzied, their desperation palpable as they sought to overwhelm us. Mara, despite her own fears, played a crucial role in our survival. Her knowledge of the club's layout allowed us to navigate the chaos and find strategic positions to fight from. She led us to hidden rooms and passageways, using her familiarity with the club to outmaneuver the angels. Her courage in the face of such overwhelming horror was inspiring, and it gave us the strength to keep fighting. As we pressed on, the environment around us seemed to warp and shift. The walls of the club pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. It was as if the angels' presence was distorting reality itself, bending the world to their will. We had to stay focused, to push through the fear and confusion if we were to survive. In the midst of the chaos, we discovered a hidden supernatural ecosystem within the club. Bizarre and grotesque entities roamed these secret spaces, their forms twisted by the same dark forces that empowered the angels. These creatures were both terrifying and fascinating, a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding. It was clear that the Club Anat was more than just a hiding place for angels. It was a nexus of supernatural activity, a hub for the dark and the divine. The tide of the battle began to turn in our favor, but the cost was high. The angels' attacks became more desperate, their transformations more horrific. They lashed out with a ferocity born of desperation, their bodies contorting into nightmarish shapes. Each victory came at a price, leaving us more exhausted and wounded. But we pressed on, driven by a grim determination to see this through to the end. Grimshaw's internal conflict intensified as the battle raged on. The moral implications of our actions weighed heavily on me, the line between right and wrong blurring with each passing moment. The use of ritualistic sacrifices, the manipulation of Mara, and the sheer brutality of our fight against the angels, all of it gnawed at my conscience. But there was no turning back now. We were committed to this path, for better or worse. Celine's idealism had been shattered, but in its place was a steely resolve. She fought with a ferocity that matched the angel's own, her determination unyielding. The horrors we had faced had forged a bond between us, a partnership built on shared suffering and a mutual understanding of the stakes. Together, we were a formidable team, capable of facing whatever horrors lay ahead. As the battle reached its climax, the angels' desperation became evident. They were no longer the divine beings they once were. They had become twisted parodies of themselves, their power corrupted by their own malevolence. With one final desperate assault, they tried to overwhelm us. But we stood our ground, our resolve unbroken. Using every last bit of strength and the purity of the sacrificial lamb's blood, we struck the final blow. The club Onat fell silent, the air heavy with the aftermath of our struggle. The angels lay defeated, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The supernatural presence that had permeated the club began to fade, the reality around us returning to normal. We were victorious, but the cost had been high. The club was in ruins, and the emotional toll on all of us was immense. But we had survived, and in doing so, we had taken a step closer to uncovering the truth behind the angels and the forgotten country that had been erased from history. As we emerged into the cold Berlin night, the city's usual hustle and bustle felt like a distant memory. The quiet was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just endured. We knew that this victory was just one battle in a much larger war, a war that would continue to test our resolve and challenge our understanding of the supernatural. But for now, we had each other, and that was enough to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The eerie silence of the club Onat after our initial battle was a deceptive calm. We knew the angels were not entirely vanquished. Their presence lingered like a malignant shadow. As we moved through the wreckage, our senses heightened, the final confrontation loomed. The sense of impending doom was almost suffocating, but there was no room for hesitation or doubt. Mr. Heinrich, the manager of Onat, was the epicenter of the supernatural chaos. His shrine, a grotesque altar to the angels, pulsed with an unholy energy. When we confronted him, he was a shell of the man Mara had described. His eyes, once hollow and haunted, now burned with an unnatural light. The transformation began slowly, his body contorting and twisting as the angelic force within him took hold. The sight was horrifying. Heinrich's form morphed into a grotesque angelic abomination, a twisted parody of divine beauty. His wings, blackened and tattered, erupted from his back, and his face distorted into a mask of agony and rage. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, and the temperature plummeted. Celine and I stood our ground, every muscle tensed for the imminent attack. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Heinrich, now fully transformed, wielded powers that defied comprehension. He lashed out with tendrils of darkness, each strike carrying the weight of his corrupted divinity. Celine and I fought back with everything we had, bullets, blades, and the sacred lamb's blood we had brought as our last resort. The club itself seemed to react to the conflict, the walls pulsating and warping as the supernatural forces clashed. In the heat of the battle, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here, the moral ambiguity of our mission, the sacrifices we had made, and the lives we had touched all weighed heavily on my mind. I thought of Mara, whose courage had helped us navigate this nightmare, and of Celine, whose idealism had been tested and reshaped by the horrors we faced. Each of us had been changed irrevocably by the events of the past few days. Celine fought with a ferocity I had never seen in her before. Her resolve was unyielding, her movements precise and deadly. She seemed to channel all her anger and frustration into each strike, driving Heinrich back inch by inch. Her transformation from an idealistic recruit to a hardened warrior was stark, a testament to the brutal reality of our work. I could see the toll it was taking on her, but there was no turning back now. As the battle reached its peak, I knew we had to act decisively. Heinrich's power was immense, but it was also unstable. Each attack he launched seemed to drain him, his form flickering with an almost desperate intensity. We needed to find a way to tip the scales in our favor, to exploit the weakness inherent in his corrupted state. It was then that I remembered the final part of the Saint of Parasite's prophecy, a clue that had seemed cryptic at the time, but now made perfect sense. With a shout to Celine, I directed our efforts towards the shrine itself. Heinrich's power was tied to the altar, its presence a conduit for the angelic force within him. Destroying it would sever his connection to the supernatural, rendering him vulnerable. It was a risky move, but we had no other choice. We fought our way to the shrine, every step a battle against the overwhelming power that sought to crush us. The final moments of the battle were a blur of chaos and violence. We reached the shrine and began to dismantle it, using the sacred lamb's blood to purify and weaken its dark energy. Heinrich's screams of rage and pain echoed through the club, each cry a testament to the power we were stripping away. The walls of the club seemed to tremble, the very fabric of reality buckling under the strain of the conflict. With a final, desperate effort, we destroyed the shrine. The explosion of energy that followed was blinding, a burst of light and sound that knocked us off our feet. When the dust settled, Heinrich lay on the ground, his angelic form shattered and broken. The darkness that had filled the club began to recede, the malevolent energy dissipating into nothingness. We had won, but the cost was etched into our souls. Celine and I stood in the aftermath, bruised and bloody but victorious. The Club Amat was in ruins, its supernatural inhabitants vanquished. But the victory felt hollow, the moral implications of our actions weighing heavily on us. We had saved countless lives, but at what cost? The manipulation of Mara, the use of sacrificial blood, and the brutal reality of our work with deep six all left scars that would never fully heal. As we left the club, the cold Berlin night embraced us, a stark reminder of the world we fought to protect. The true nature of our mission was clear now. Our battle was not just against supernatural threats, but against the darkness within ourselves. The horrors of the Paris catacombs and the angels of Berlin were just the beginning. The real nightmare was the understanding of what we had become in the process. We were survivors, but at what price? The Club Onat was a scene of devastation. The aftermath of our battle with Heinrich and the angels left the once vibrant place in shambles. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and scorch marks from our desperate fight marred every surface. The quiet that followed the chaos was almost eerie, a stark contrast to the violence that had erupted within these walls. Celine and I stood amidst the wreckage, catching our breath and surveying the damage. The weight of what we had done, and what we still needed to do, hung heavily in the air. Despite our victory, the sense of foreboding did not lift. The angels were defeated, but the dark presence that had pervaded the club lingered, like an echo of the battle that had just ended. We knew that our mission was far from over. The supernatural forces we had confronted were part of a larger, more insidious network of entities that stretched beyond Berlin, beyond anything we had yet encountered. Mara emerged from her hiding place, her face pale and eyes wide with shock. The courage she had shown during the battle had been extraordinary, but now the reality of what she had witnessed was sinking in. I could see the fear and confusion in her eyes, the dawning realization of the world she had been thrust into. We needed her, not just for the information she possessed, but also for the human connection she represented in this sea of supernatural horror. As we regrouped, the full scope of our next steps became clear. We had to cover up the events that had transpired, ensuring that no trace of the supernatural remained. This was not just about protecting ourselves, but also about maintaining the fragile barrier between the normal world and the dark forces that lurked beneath its surface. The task was grim, and it weighed heavily on all of us. The most difficult part of our plan involved Mara. To protect her and ourselves, we needed to manipulate the narrative of what had happened in the club. The thought of what we had to do made my stomach churn, but there was no alternative. We convinced Mara that her involvement had to remain a secret, that the only way to ensure her safety was to disappear, at least for a while. It was a cruel manipulation, one that left a bitter taste in my mouth. With heavy hearts, we set about cleaning up the evidence. Celine and I worked methodically, our training kicking in as we erased the signs of the supernatural battle. We dismantled the remnants of Heinrich's shrine, disposed of the sacred lamb's blood, and restored the club as best we could. The process was grueling, both physically and emotionally, but it was necessary. Each step felt like a betrayal of our principles, a descent into the moral ambiguity that had come to define our work with deep sticks. The looming threat of deep six tracking us down added a sense of urgency to our actions. We knew that our former organization would not tolerate any leaks, and that they would go to great lengths to silence us if they believed we posed a threat. The fear of being hunted by our own allies was a constant shadow, one that drove us to complete our task with even greater determination. We had to stay hidden, to protect ourselves from the very people who had trained us. As the night wore on, the reality of what we had done settled over us like a shroud. We had defeated the angels, but at a great cost. The moral corruption within Deep Six, the use of sacrificial blood, and the manipulation of Mara all weighed heavily on our consciences. Celine and I were no longer the people we had been at the start of this mission. We had been changed, shaped by the darkness we had confronted and the choices we had made. By the time dawn broke, the Club Anat was as clean as we could make it. The signs of the supernatural battle were gone, but the memories lingered. We had saved countless lives by stopping the angels, but the price we had paid felt almost too high. The victory was hollow, tainted by the moral compromises we had been forced to make. As we stepped out into the cold Berlin morning, the city felt both familiar and alien, a reflection of our own fractured selves. The journey was not over. The threat of Deep Six and the other supernatural forces we had yet to face loomed large. But in that moment, standing beside Celine and Mara, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had survived, and in doing so, we had forged a bond that would carry us through whatever came next. The horrors of the Paris catacombs and the angels of Berlin were just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, in the battles yet to be fought and the darkness yet to be confronted. As we prepared to leave Berlin, the weight of our experiences hung heavily over us. We were different now, marked by the things we had seen and done, but we were also stronger, more resolute. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and moral ambiguity, but we would face it together, armed with the knowledge that we had already survived the unimaginable. The nightmares of our past would not define us. Instead, they would guide us as we moved forward into the unknown. The cold Berlin air nipped at our faces as we stepped out of the Club Anat. The dawn light felt strangely harsh, a reminder of the grim reality we had just endured. The victory over the angels had left us battered and bruised, but not broken. As we walked away from the ruins of our battle, I couldn't shake the weight of my reflections. The mission had been a success, but the moral cost had been immense. Back in the relative safety of our temporary hideout, I allowed myself a moment of respite. The events of the past few days played over and over in my mind, a relentless loop of horror and guilt. The internal conflict I had wrestled with for years had intensified. Every decision, every sacrifice haunted me. The line between right and wrong had blurred beyond recognition. I found myself questioning not just the mission, but my very purpose. Celine sat across from me, her face etched with the same exhaustion and doubt. Her journey from an idealistic recruit to a battle-hardened agent had been swift and brutal. She had faced horrors that would break most people, yet she remained resolute. But I could see the cracks in her armor. The same doubts that plagued me were now her constant companions. The moral implications of our work with Deep Six had shattered her idealism, leaving behind a steely determination tempered with sorrow. As we talked, the looming threat of Deep Six tracking us down weighed heavily on our minds. We knew they would stop at nothing to silence any potential leaks. Our only option was to stay hidden, to move from place to place, always one step ahead. The fear of being hunted by our former allies was a constant shadow, a reminder of the life we had left behind, but could never truly escape. In those quiet moments, I found myself reflecting on the mission and its impact on my life. The haunting memories of the Paris catacombs, the grotesque figure of the Saint of Parasites, and the final confrontation with Heinrich all swirled together in a nightmarish tapestry. Each event had left its mark, shaping me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The moral ambiguity and psychological manipulation within Deep Six had pushed me to my limits, forcing me to confront the darkest parts of my soul. Celine's transformation was equally profound. Her idealism had been tested and ultimately broken, but in its place was a new resolve. She had seen the depths of human and supernatural depravity, yet she continued to fight. Her strength and determination were a source of inspiration, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still hope. Together, we were a formidable team, bound by our shared experiences and the unspoken understanding of the horrors we had faced. As the days passed, the immediate threat of Deep Six began to fade, but the psychological scars remained. We had defeated the angels, but the true battle was within ourselves. The guilt of manipulating Mara, the use of sacrificial blood, and the brutal reality of our work left deep wounds. We had to find a way to reconcile our actions with our conscience, to make peace with the choices we had made. Mara's fate weighed heavily on me. Convincing her to disappear had been a necessary evil, but it felt like a betrayal of the highest order. She had been an innocent caught in the crossfire, and now her life was forever changed. I hoped that wherever she was, she could find some semblance of peace. Her courage had been instrumental in our mission, and I owed her more than I could ever repay. As we prepared to leave Berlin, the city felt both familiar and alien. The horrors we had faced had left an indelible mark on us, but they had also forged a bond that would carry us through whatever came next. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and moral ambiguity. But we would face it together, armed with the knowledge that we had already survived the unimaginable. The haunting legacy of our mission was not something we could escape, but it was something we could learn from. Each scar, each memory was a testament to our resilience and our determination to continue fighting against the supernatural threats that lurked in the shadows. The road ahead was long and perilous, but we were ready. The nightmares of our past would guide us, shaping our future as we confronted the darkness within and without. In the end, it was the bond between Celine and me that gave me hope. We had faced the unimaginable together and emerged stronger for it. The horrors of the Paris catacombs and the angels of Berlin were just the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead, in the battles yet to be fought and the darkness yet to be confronted. But we were ready, and together, we would face whatever horrors the future held.